The presidential media extortion campaign has gone international. First up, London. The tow-headed lad from Mar-a-Lago is putting the cool back in Britannia, inviting the national broadcaster to hand over $10 billion. He's filed a lawsuit against the BBC for defamatory editing and splicing, although this appears to be news to him.
In a little while, you'll be seeing I'm suing the BBC for putting words in my mouth, literally. They put words in my mouth. They had me saying things that I never said coming out. I guess they used AI or something. So we'll be bringing that lawsuit. A lot of people are asking, when are you bringing that lawsuit?
What? No! This lawsuit has nothing to do with AI. It's just stuff Trump said on January 6th, edited to make it seem like he was urging his followers to go attack the Capitol, which, to be fair, they did. No one put words in the president's mouth. They just took different parts of the speech and played them closer together than he said them. I'm starting to worry that our leader may be a little bit confused about some stuff.
United Kingdom? Where's United Kingdom? Where's Russia? Where? Come here. Is everything going good?
Very good.
But what he's not confused about is the bottom line. He's netted tens of millions of dollars by filing bogus lawsuits against American media companies, and now he sees a chance to profiteer off another country's culture war, and he's taking it. Okay, let's keep calm and law-splain on. Obviously, this isn't the president's first defamation rodeo. In fact, suing media companies is basically his third favorite thing to do after golf and screaming at female reporters. Here's a non-exhaustive list of everyone Trump sued since 2020. He sued the New York Times for reporting on his family's taxes and business practices. He sued the Washington Post for its coverage of the Mueller investigation into his campaign's ties to Russia. He sued the Pulitzer Prize Committee for refusing to rescind awards to the Times and the Post for reporting about the Mueller investigation. He sued Hillary Clinton, James Comey, the Democratic National Committee, and his own Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein for doing the RICO and conspiring to gin up the Mueller investigation. He sued Twitter, Meta, and Google for tortiously deplatforming after January 6th. He sued publishing house Simon & Schuster for releasing an audiobook of his interviews with Bob Woodward. He sued New York Attorney General Letitia James for investigating his company. He sued CNN for using the phrase "the big lie." He sued E. Jean Carroll for saying that he sexually assaulted her. He sued CBS for tortiously editing an interview with Kamala Harris. He sued the Des Moines Register for whiffing a poll. He's currently suing the New York Times again for reporting on his business, and the Wall Street Journal for reporting that he drew boobies on a birthday card to Jeffrey Epstein. And he's threatening to sue Hunter Biden and journalist Michael Wolff for saying that Jeffrey Epstein introduced him to his wife, Melania. I'm sure I missed a few, but you get the picture. In exactly none of these cases has a judge or jury said, "Yes, Mr. Trump, this is a meritorious lawsuit and you win." He and his lawyers got sanctioned $1 million in the Clinton RICO suit, with the judge saying this case should never have been brought. Its inadequacy as a legal claim was evident from the start. No reasonable lawyer would have filed it. He wound up paying the New York Times' legal bills back in 2024, and the judge immediately dismissed the lawsuit he filed against the Times in 2025 for being decidedly improper and impermissible. The court gave Trump's lawyers 30 days to refile an appropriate complaint, which they did. That's not to say that Trump hasn't scored some victories, just, not in court. Twitter, Google, and Facebook decided to pay him to settle lawsuits they'd functionally won. CBS paid millions to Trump's non-existent presidential library to settle the 60 Minutes lawsuit. And about 5 minutes later, the FCC approved a merger between its parent company Paramount and Skydance. Big coincidence, huh? And ABC paid to settle a lawsuit over George Stephanopoulos, calling Trump an adjudicated rapist. In fact, he's an adjudicated sexual abuser, and one who actually sued his victim for coming forward. But Donald Trump isn't winning these lawsuits in court because in some sense, they aren't real lawsuits at all. They're like a stick-up note with a very big White House-shaped gun behind them. And now that gun is pointed squarely at the BBC. The British Broadcasting Company is the United Kingdom's national media outlet. It's publicly subsidized by a license fee paid by every household or business with a TV. It's one of the pillars of British civic society and a source of cultural capital and influence. From Doctor Who to Monty Python to Peaky Blinders to The Great British Bake Off to 1,000,000 hours of David Attenborough and prestige miniseries, you and I and everyone else have watched the BBC. And when it comes to news, it's one of the most trusted global brands, including in America. But even good media outlets sometimes screw up. And in October of 2024, the BBC documentary news program Panorama aired a special called Trump, A Second Chance, which contained misleadingly edited footage of the president's infamous speech on January 6, 2021. Producers spliced together Trump saying, "We're going to walk down to the Capitol and we're going to cheer on our brave senators and congressmen," and later footage of him saying, "Fight like hell." The effect was to imply that he said, we're going to walk down to the Capitol and I'll be there with you and we fight like hell. And if you don't fight like hell, we're not going to have a country anymore.
We're going to walk down to the Capitol and I'll be there with you. And we fight. We fight like hell.
Thousands of Trump supporters certainly did understand him to be instructing them to walk down to the Capitol and fight like hell to overturn the results of the election, because that's exactly what they did. But in fact, those two clips were 54 minutes apart, and editing it to make them seem sequential was a breach of journalistic ethics. I mean, nobody thinks that's okay. But in the moment, no one really noticed. The Panorama broadcast had zero effect, and Trump won the 2024 election easily. Pretty much everyone forgot about the show until November 3rd, 2025, when the conservative Daily Telegraph published a memo by former BBC advisor Michael Prescott critiquing the BBC for being too liberal. Prescott, an ex-journalist who now works in PR, says the network is too pro-immigrant. He criticizes it for celebrating the trans experience without adequate balance or objectivity, and for airing ill-researched material that suggested issues of racism when there were none. And of course, he says the BBC is anti-Trump. Prescott was the one who surfaced the editing screw-up in the Panorama documentary, and then all hell broke loose. What happened next really had nothing to do with Trump at all. Every country has culture war issues that stand in for larger battles between left and right. Here in America, we have a new one every day. Like, remember when Fox host Tucker Carlson spent several days losing his mind because the girl Eminem wasn't sexy anymore, or that fight over paper drinking straws? I bet no one even remembers why people were mad about Mr. Potato Head in 2021. And look, it's no different in the UK, where the BBC is a constant political football. Broadly speaking, conservatives want to cut funding for the national broadcaster, and liberals don't. And in this environment, Prescott's memo ignited a firestorm, as it was surely intended to do. Conservative Party leader Kemi Badenoch called for heads to roll. She said that the way the BBC has continually covered issues of sex and gender had alienated the public, and a lot of women out there believe that the BBC is institutionally biased against them. Her predecessor, Liz Truss, who tacked hard right after her brief and disastrous stint as prime minister, called to defund the BBC altogether. And Reform Party leader Nigel Farage used the Trump incident as a force multiplier to attack the institutional media. The BBC's two top leaders almost immediately resigned, and there's going to be an institutional soul-searching. But on the other side of the pond, Trump spotted another opportunity to enrich himself while attacking the media.
The president has made it very clear that this is a leftist propaganda machine that is unfortunately subsidized.
Look, it goes without saying that this is just the latest in an unceasing assault on the First Amendment, and the big media networks are capitulating left and right. Independent media is more important than ever, and that's one of the many reasons we banded together with hundreds of your favorite nonfiction news and educational content creators to build Nebula, the sponsor of today's video. Nebula is a streaming service where you can watch all the content from your favorite creators like Johnny Harris, Neo, Jetlag, Real Engineering, Real Life Lore, and of course, LegalEagle ad-free and early, plus watch countless Nebula exclusives and original videos made with love, time, effort, and increased budgets that would be too risky on YouTube. I personally love Tara Mookney's incredibly well-researched series Politics, which explores the hidden politics of female breasts. But the only place you can watch it is on Nebula. In fact, we upload extended cuts of every video we make to Nebula, like the video Devin did with Brennan Lee Mulligan on the legal beatdown that he and Dr. Mike gave to The Good Doctor. Both contain over 10 minutes of hilarious insights and analysis that we had to cut from the YouTube version. But the best part about watching LegalEagle on Nebula is that we've uploaded tons of exclusive content, like this recent video of the wild and forgotten attempts to ban booze in the US, and my video on how RFK Jr. can legally ban vaccines. And at Nebula, we're in it for the longest term possible, a lifetime. That's why our link and code will get you $200 off the lifetime subscription rate of $500. That means that for $300, you can start watching every LegalEagle video ad-free and early forever, or you can get 50% off an annual subscription. That's a year of the best content for just $30. Either way, click or scan now to continue watching LegalEagle on Nebula, or we will see you in court. On November 9th, Trump's lawyer Alejandro Brito fired off a nastygram to BBC chair Samir Shah. He said that the Panorama broadcast was false and defamatory, and that due to their salacious nature, the fabricated statements that were aired by the BBC have been widely disseminated throughout various digital mediums, which have reached tens of millions of people worldwide. Consequently, the BBC has caused President Trump to suffer overwhelming financial and reputational harm. It's basically a cut and paste job of the letters he sent to Hunter Biden and Michael Wolff. Brito sends out quite a lot of these things. He demanded that the BBC, 1, immediately issue a full retraction, 2, immediately issue an apology, and 3, appropriately compensate President Trump for the harm caused. The letter ended with a threat. If the BBC does not comply with the above by November 14, 2025 at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, President Trump will be left with no alternative but to enforce his legal and equitable rights, including by filing a legal action for no less than $1 billion in damages. BBC Chair Samir Shah did indeed send Trump a letter apologizing for the screw-up, and the network published a retraction on its website and promised never to run the program again. But Shah said he was not going to give Trump any British taxpayer money. He did not mention that Trump is about as popular with the British public as drug-resistant syphilis, and that it would be political suicide to bribe him with cash out of the public fisc. The BBC hired famed First Amendment and media lawyer Charles Tobin of the American law firm Ballard Spahr. Tobin fired off a response to Brito, noting that the show never aired in the U.S. and was not available on the BBC's streaming platform outside the UK. Trump was never harmed by the broadcast and was, in fact, easily elected in 2024, improving his margin in Florida over 2020 and 2016. The 12-second clip was not designed to mislead, but just to shorten a long speech and should be considered in the context of an hour-long program, and that U.S. law has strong protections for expressions of opinion, particularly on matters of public concern and regarding a public figure. But Trump wasn't satisfied. He said he simply had to sue, not to enrich himself, of course, but to protect the public. And so, on December 15th, he did. Kind of.
How far will you push it? Because they haven't offered, our understanding is they've offered no money whatsoever. They've apologised in a letter, but they haven't offered you a penny in compensation. There was this figure of $1 billion that you may be pursuing.
I think I have an obligation to do it. Look, I'm not looking to get into lawsuits, but I think I have an obligation to do it. This was so egregious. If you don't do it, you don't stop it from happening again with other people. I think you probably have an obligation.
Honestly, this is more of a lawsuit-shaped object than a real defamation claim. Rule 8 of the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure says that a civil complaint should contain a short and plain statement of the grounds for the court's jurisdiction and a short and plain statement of the claim showing that the pleader is entitled to relief. It should not be a vehicle for generalized airing of grievances unrelated to any legally cognizable injury. And although this complaint is still a relatively slim 33 pages, which is less than some of the 100-plus page monstrosities this crew has filed, it's still larded down with irrelevant whining about how the BBC is biased against Trump and bad at journalism, which may or may not be true, but isn't against the law. As a threshold matter, it's not clear that any court in Florida has jurisdiction over the BBC. As Trump himself admits, all 3 of the corporate entities he's suing are domiciled in Britain. Now, he might be able to convince a court that BBC does enough business in the state that is effectively a Florida company. To be fair, one of the BBC affiliates does maintain an office in Coral Gables, and the producers of the documentary traveled to Florida to get footage of Mar-a-Lago. But the first element of defamation is publication, that is, saying the defamatory thing out loud where someone can hear you, and that's going to be a problem since the BBC doesn't appear to have licensed this particular episode of Panorama for broadcast in the United States. Now, Florida has a really expansive definition of jurisdiction. They'll basically let a Florida resident sue anyone on earth for defamation so long as the statement was published on the internet and read in Florida. But that rule does have limits. In 2010, the state's Supreme Court said material posted on the website about a Florida resident must not only be accessible in Florida, but also be accessed in Florida in order to constitute the commission of a tortious act of defamation within Florida. And it's just not clear that any Florida resident saw this documentary. But Trump's lawyers have an answer for that, and it is nuh-uh. They say the Panorama documentary was available to be viewed by citizens of Florida and was, in fact, viewed in Florida by citizens of Florida, notwithstanding the BBC's anticipated and inaccurate claims that the documentary was unviewable in the United States due to purported geolocking. They say that the website, bbc.com, is available in Florida. They do not say that you can watch the Panorama episode on it because you can't, and you never could. They say that the BBC subsidiary BritBox is available in the United States, and BritBox carries Panorama. Note that they do not say it carried this episode of Panorama because it didn't. They say that the BBC made the program available for distribution in the US. They do not say that the program was licensed for distribution in the US because, again, didn't happen. They also make a very funny argument about VPNs. Their theory is that lots of people use a VPN to make it look like they're watching from some other location, and VPN usage rose dramatically in 2025, and this establishes the immense likelihood that citizens of Florida accessed the documentary before the BBC had it removed. Is there any other reason besides this obscure BBC show, which was only available to stream in the UK, that might explain why Floridians' use of VPN spiked in 2025? How about we click that link in this very complaint? Turns out, Florida's age verification law went into effect on January 1. So if you want to watch porn in Florida without showing ID, you got to use a VPN. Now, maybe after those gators finished watching Pornhub, they switched their location to Cornwall and got down and dirty with a documentary about Donald Trump. I am not here to kink shame, but I'm not sure that's going to get a federal judge over the jurisdictional finish line. But okay, assume that you get jurisdiction. Trump is still a public figure, which means he'll have to prove that the BBC's statement was made with actual malice under the New York Times v. Sullivan. So he'll have to prove that the statement was false and that the BBC knew it was false or spoke with reckless disregard for the truth. Traditionally, public figures satisfy this requirement by telling the speaker that the statement is false, demanding a retraction, and then pointing to the lack of retraction as proof of actual malice. In fact, Florida law limits damages for media outlets which retract stories before being sued. Here, Trump asked for and got a retraction and apology, and then he had the nerve to point to that retraction and apology as proof of actual malice. Other than that, this complaint just says over and over again, the BBC hates Trump, ipso facto, actual malice, and that may be evidence of colloquial malice. That is, maybe the BBC really does dislike Trump and aired the documentary outside the US to people who couldn't vote for him with the goal of torpedoing his electoral prospects. But that would be entirely legal on either side of the pond. And then there's the issue of damages, because defamation requires publication of a false statement that causes actual harm. The complaint says that specific, extensive economic harms resulted from these defamatory statements. And if you're asking for $10 billion, you'd think they'd have something to back that one up, but nope. They say that Trump's personal brand alone is reasonably estimated to be worth tens of billions of dollars, and business ventures bearing his name generate hundreds of millions of dollars of annual revenue. And they state without evidence that there's been severe diminishment to the value of his brand, properties, and businesses, and tarnishing of his reputation as a politician, leader, and businessman in the eyes of the American public and around the world. The complaint did not point to any economic harm suffered by the president as a result of 12 seconds of badly edited footage on a BBC documentary that never aired in the US, because there is none. According to Forbes, Trump's personal wealth has increased by $3 billion since he came back into office, and it certainly didn't harm Trump in the eyes of Florida voters. Okay, so Trump wants $5 billion for defamation. Where does the other $5 billion come from? Well, as they've done in a bunch of these troll suits, Trump's lawyers threw in a claim under Florida's consumer protection statute. This is a fun game his legal team likes to play to try and get around anti-SLAPP laws, which penalize plaintiffs for filing lawsuits designed to chill speech. All you have to do is pretend that audiences are consumers, political speech is merchandise, and that Donald Trump is a business who competes with the BBC. This will not work in court, but a bunch of media companies and social media platforms have kicked up cash to make these suits go away, so Brito and the boys keep trying it. Plus, it allows them to tack on an additional $5 billion in imaginary damages, so ka-ching! This case was filed in the Miami division of the Southern District of Florida in the hopes of getting in front of one of the 6 judges Trump himself appointed in the district. And it worked. The case was assigned to Judge Roy Altman, whom Trump tapped in 2019. Altman is indeed a very conservative judge with roots in the right-wing Federalist Society. There's no indication that he's some kind of MAGA warrior, although I suppose time will tell. I will note that Trump's own appointees have not been particularly receptive to these media lawsuits. In 2023, Judge Raj Singhal, also appointed by Trump, dismissed a similar defamation suit against CNN. Incidentally, Trump only asked for $475 million in damages in that one, and they say inflation is down. Plus, have a look at that signature block. Lindsay Halligan, never heard of her. So we will have to wait and see if Judge Altman is more like Judge Singhal or Judge Eileen Cannon, who really did the most for Donald Trump back in 2024. Because if Altman isn't wearing a secret red hat, this case could be problematic for Trump and his lawyers. Remember that letter the BBC's lawyers sent Brito? It ended with a typically polite hope that the BBC's public statements of contrition and the direct apology that we have given to the president will suffice to put this matter to rest. But in the event that it didn't, they warned that the BBC reserves all further rights and remedies, including those available under Florida Statutes 57105 and 768-295-2A. The first is the Florida law, which allows for sanctions in the form of attorney's fees when the losing party's attorney knew or should have known that a claim presented to the court was not supported by the material facts or the law. The second is Florida's anti-SLAPP statute, which makes it easier for defendants to put an end to abusive lawsuits by ordering the court to rule as soon as possible on motions to dismiss an anti-SLAPP suit. It also has a fee-shifting provision, making the losing party pay the winner's legal fees. Now, to be clear, those are state laws. Federal courts are not bound to follow them, but there are federal rules allowing similar sanctions for lawyers who abuse the legal process and pursue frivolous litigation. In fact, Trump knows this really well since he and his lawyers got sanctioned to the tune of $1 million for their idiotic RICO suit against Hillary Clinton. So if the BBC is really willing to play hardball, this could wind up being very unpleasant for Trump and Brito. And so far, it looks like the BBC is holding firm. The network said it will defend itself in court, and the country's political leadership has come out strongly against any settlement. So, cool, Britannia.
Now, all this highlights why it's so important to get a great lawyer when you're dealing with your own case. Now, after I started this channel, every week I'd get hundreds of comments and emails from viewers who are dealing with legal problems. And they'd ask, can you help me find a lawyer? How do I know if this attorney is any good? And there's a massive gap in our justice system. It's that people don't know how to find the right lawyer for their specific situation. They're scared, they're overwhelmed, and they end up doing nothing or hiring the first attorney who calls them back. And that really bothered me. So I started to wonder, what if there was a different way? What if we could build a law firm that actually lived up to the values that I talk about on this channel? Transparency, accessibility, and putting clients first instead of chasing billable hours. A firm where you don't need to pay anything up front, and your lawyers only get paid if you do to maximize your opportunity for justice. So a few years ago, I decided to fix that problem. I decided to start my own personal injury law firm. And honestly, it wasn't an easy choice. But I realized I was in this unique position. I had this platform, this community, and the experience. Not to get rich, trust me, there are easier ways to make money than starting a law practice. But we did it because access to justice shouldn't be a luxury. Because finding the right legal representation shouldn't feel like playing Russian roulette with your future. And when you work with my firm, you're not just getting a lawyer. You're getting a team that understands that behind every case is a real person with real stakes. If we can't represent you or you're in a state where we don't practice, we'll take the time to try to match you with an attorney in my personal network of lawyers. A national network of some of the best lawyers in the country who actually specialize in what you're going through, located right where you are, not just whoever happens to be available. So if you're dealing with a personal injury, a car crash, a data breach, sexual harassment, a social security or workers' comp issue, give us a call at the number on screen or click on the link below. Now, I can't represent everyone that watches this channel. I wish I could, but what I can do is make sure that when you need legal help, you have somewhere to turn to that you can trust. So whether it's me handling your case or the incredible attorneys we partnered with, you'll get the same principles of honesty and education that we bring to every video. And if you're dealing with a legal issue and you're not sure where to start, check out the link in the description. Let's have a conversation about how we can help you find not just a lawyer, but the right lawyer for your situation. Because at the end of the day, that's what this is all about, making sure that when life gets complicated, you don't have to face it alone. Which is why when you need a lawyer, you don't just need a legal team, you need the Eagle team.